Why do video games have so much death? It can be fairly difficult to even come up with any examples of games that don't involve dying in some way. Some very old games like Pong don't involve any death. It's just a broad loser and winner. Some sports games like FIFA and Madden games don't have death, but for the most part, the vast majority of games you play will involve death in some way, shape or form. In fact, it'd be fairly difficult to remove death from a lot of games, wouldn't it? Like, could you create the Call of Duty franchise without any death in it whatsoever? Of course you couldn't. Removing death from video games would mean redefining an entire industry. Death and video games go hand in hand. Either you will die, or you will kill other living things when you play the game. Even some of the cutest and cuddliest games out there involve death. Anything from Minecraft to Doom, to Gang Beasts to Resident Evil all have death. So why is this? Are gamers just inherently violent-natured people, these bloodthirsty, violent psychopaths that just derive all of their pleasure from the bloodshed of others? The suffering caused by their actions? No. No, they're not. I think that the all too common narrative of video games cause violence and gamers are inherently violent goes out the window when you realise that in the vast majority of games, your character's death is a simple and violence-free poof as you disappear off of screen with some particle effect or something. But even so, I think that this narrative neglects to acknowledge the reasons that death is so heavily featured in video games. Death is the easiest way to show a player that they lost. It's the most obvious lose condition you can create for a player, because dying is bad, so dying is losing. It's very intuitive to the player. Let's say you're making a game that isn't set in the real world, maybe the characters aren't even human, and your game involves some sort of challenge that the player has to overcome. The easiest way to show that the player has lost is to have them die, because people will understand that dying is losing. There are obviously other ways that you can have the player lose in a game. There can be like a timer that runs out, or you can have an objective on the map be destroyed.
I love League of Legends!
But none of them are as simple and as obvious to read as dying. So dying tends to be the most commonly used method to show that a player was defeated. They didn't win the game because they died. Even in something as ancient as chess, when the king dies with 10 quotation marks, that's when you lose. But I don't think you could reasonably argue that all chess players are inherently violent, could you? Although this guy does often have a bit of a crazed look in his eye, doesn't he? Remember earlier when I was mentioning games that didn't involve death? Games like Pong, Madden and FIFA? Do you notice something that all of those games have in common? They're all based on physical, real-world games that already have hundreds or even thousands of years of development into the games that they are today. These two are obvious, but for those of you who don't know, Pong is based on table tennis, otherwise known as ping pong, hence the name Pong. And ping pong already has a win condition built into the real-world version of the game, so I don't think the developers of Pong really needed the paddle to violently explode into blood on screen whenever they lost a point or something. Another reason that death is so prominently featured in video games is because the real world involves death, so anytime you want to create a game that is based in the real world, past, present or future, death can be likely to come up. If you decide that your game involves real human beings engaging in real combat, then death is almost an inevitable outcome of that decision. Even if you want to make a game that isn't set in the real world or in our universe, death is likely present for all of those same reasons. Movies have this exact same problem. Death is a great way to create drama in a story, and it's also something that people relate to, and because of this, a lot of movies heavily feature death. A lot of games, as well as movies, will use real-life historical events as a setting. Like, there are countless World War II shooters out there, and you can't exactly make a game or a movie about World War II without having the two sides shoot guns at each other. So now just for a quick behind the scenes, I've been thinking about this video topic for quite a while, because I had the basic concept for the video down, asking the question, why do video games have so much death? That's the concept for the video, but I didn't really have a great answer for the question. I had the point about death being very intuitive to show a player that they've lost, because everyone knows that dying's bad, so if you die in the video game, that's bad, right? I had that part down, but I needed more. But after thinking about it for a while, another answer to this question hit me, and once I realised, it seemed so painfully obvious that I couldn't believe it hadn't occurred to me sooner. It doesn't quite apply to every single game, but it does encompass the vast majority of them. So I'm going to give you the epiphany I had whilst writing this script, shall I? Doom, Gang Beasts, League of Legends, Super Smash Bros. All of these games feature death in some way, shape or form, in its most grisly form and its most child-friendly form. So what do all these games have in common? Combat. It's combat. Combat is a game that human beings have been playing for thousands of years, since the dawn of man. And in the real world, combat can often lead to death. But combat can also be fun, from siblings play fighting in their rooms to boxers punching the crap out of each other in a ring with thousands of live audience members. There are dozens of sports dedicated to combat. Boxing, MMA, fencing, sumo, there's more, but we'd be here forever. The real-life versions of fighting for sport can't really have you literally murdering your opponent, can they? But the video game version of fighting for sport can. And this can be extrapolated into other types of games. Not to mention that combat is a very simple, very easy to understand, and very easy to implement goal for the player. There's nothing to be misunderstood about kill that guy and don't let him kill you, is there? Games heavily featuring combat isn't the most overreaching reason that death is so heavily featured in video games, and I'd even say that it's not the most important reason either. But it seems so obvious now that I've thought about it that I felt stupid for not considering it after thinking about this video for weeks on end. Simply put, death in video games is a game mechanic. It's a tool used to portray something to the player, whether it's intended to invoke an emotion or to tell a player that they've lost or to create drama in a narrative. Characters die because it's useful to game developers, for both storytelling and for building a gameplay loop. But let's not forget that video games are not the only form of art to go hand in hand with death. Movies, paintings, and books will often feature death too, for a myriad of reasons. Video games are no exception. Video games do have you personally acting out the violence, but in my opinion it's hardly different from watching the violence on a screen. The reality is, all art forms feature death because it is a part of the human experience. Death is a part of life, so we put death into our art. Video games being inherently violent has been a talking point of many a politician in the past that's tried to use it to explain or justify the terrible real-world actions of others. But the reality of it is, death in media is nothing new, and video games only take the brunt of the blame because they're the newest art form in town. They're ripe to be blamed for all of the crimes of all other media. Thanks for watching.